The first time I heard the bell, I was still pretending the move was a fresh start. It was late September when I arrived in Greywick, a town that looked as if it had been sketched from memory rather than built. Soot-stained brick terraces, narrow lanes that smelled of wet stone, and a river that slid through the center like a dull knife. The train left me at a small station with a single platform and a timetable that seemed more decorative than practical. When the doors shut and the carriage rolled away, the sound of it diminished quickly, swallowed by fog. The air tasted wrong. Not rotten, not chemical, just old, like the inside of an unopened wardrobe. My new rental sat at the edge of town, just beyond the rows of houses and the last pub with its faded hanging sign. A detached place with a small front garden and a backyard that sloped down into brambles. The landlord, Mr. Halberd, had described it as quiet, historic, ideal for writers. He wasn't wrong about the quiet. When I stepped out of the taxi, my own suitcase wheels seemed too loud, too modern. Even the crows that watched from the power lines were silent. The house key was in a lockbox. The code Halberd texted me worked on the first try, and the box sprang open with a click that echoed in a way it shouldn't have. I told myself it was the fog, the emptiness, my nerves. I unlocked the door and walked into the smell of dust and cold plaster. Inside, everything had been staged to look cozy in the way of short-term rentals. A plaid throw folded on the couch, a kettle and tea bags arranged like an offering, a faux vintage lamp glowing weakly in the corner. But beneath it was another scent, faint and persistent, like damp wool left too long in a drawer. Upstairs, my bedroom looked out over the back garden, and beyond the fence line, a strip of trees that leaned together as if whispering. There was no view of any neighboring houses, only trunks, branches, and the suggestion of a path that vanished into them. I stood at that window with my forehead almost touching the glass. For a moment, I thought I saw something move between the trees, something pale, the color of paper left in sunlight too long. But when I focused, there was only mist and the slow sway of branches. I unpacked in a hurry, as if speed could make the house accept me. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm not from Greywick. I'm not even from England. I'm an American who got tired of hearing his own life echo in familiar rooms. The job transfer had been convenient on paper. A temporary posting, a chance to reset, my manager had said. But the truth was simpler and uglier. After the divorce, my apartment in Boston felt like a museum of choices I'd made wrong. I'd started sleeping on the couch because the bed felt like a shared item that could never be mine again. So when an opening came up in the UK office, I took it without thinking. I told my friends I wanted adventure. I told my mother it was career growth. I didn't tell anyone I mostly wanted distance, from my ex-wife, from my old routines, from the sound of my own name spoken by people who knew what it used to mean. Greywick wasn't even my office location. My commute would be by car to a city an hour away. But I'd chosen Greywick because it was cheaper, because it was quiet, because I thought quiet meant safe. That first night, I cooked pasta and ate it standing at the counter, too tired to find the plates that matched. The house creaked in the ordinary way old houses creak, but there was a rhythm to it I didn't like the building was practicing a language. When I went to bed, the sheets smelled clean, but cold. I turned off the lamp and lay there listening to the wind worry at the trees behind the house. And then, at 1:13 a.m., the bell rang. It wasn't loud, not like church bells you hear in movies, booming over rooftops. It was distant and thin, but so clear it made the hair on my arms lift. One strike, a pause, another strike. I sat up, heart already racing, counting without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 4. The sound seemed to come from the trees, not the town. It carried like it was being wrung in a hollow space, a cavity beneath the world. By 8 strikes, my throat had gone dry. At 13, it stopped. I stared into the dark, waiting for the echo to fade, but the quiet that followed was too complete, like someone had put a hand over the mouth of the night. I told myself it was a church bell marking the hour, a town tradition, a misjudgment of distance. I lay back down, but sleep didn't come easily, because after the bell stopped, I could swear I heard something else. A faint scraping outside my window, like fingernails drawn gently along glass, not to break it, just to announce a presence. In the morning, daylight made Greywick look less like a warning and more like a postcard. Fog still clung to the river and the low streets, but the sun put a fragile gold edge on everything. I found a small grocery store near the town square and picked up eggs, bread, milk. People stared, not openly, not rudely, just long enough that I noticed. The town square held a war memorial, a stone angel with weather-softened features. Nearby, an old clock tower rose above the rooftops, its face dulled and streaked by rain. Beneath it, a pub called the Crooked Crown opened its door and let out the smell of stale beer and frying oil. I went in for coffee. The pub was nearly empty. An older man sat at the bar with a pint that looked like it had been there since yesterday. A woman in her 60s wiped down a table with the air of someone cleaning a place that would never be clean enough. She looked up when I entered. Her gaze landed on my accent before my face. "Morning," I said. "Do you do coffee?" "We do," she replied. Her voice was flat, but not unfriendly, more like cautious. I ordered, paid, and took a seat by the window. A few minutes later, she brought a mug and set it down carefully, as if the table might complain. Her eyes flicked to my hands, then to the ring finger that was pale where my wedding band used to be. "You're new," she said. "Just moved in," I replied. "Over by Hawthorne Lane." At that, something shifted in her expression. Not surprise, something closer to irritation mixed with pity. "The Halberd place," she said. "Yeah, Mr. Halberd rented it to me." She pursed her lips and glanced toward the bar, where the older man pretended not to listen. "Best keep your curtains shut at night," she said. I gave a small laugh, thinking she was making a joke at my expense. "Because of the wildlife?" She didn't smile. "Because of the bell." The word landed like a stone in my stomach. I tried to keep my tone light. "I heard that last night. Is it a church?" Her eyes dropped to the mug for a moment. "Not a church." "Then what is it?" The woman hesitated. Then she said, "You'll learn Greywick keeps its own hours." Before I could ask more, she walked away. The older man at the bar let out a slow breath through his nose like he'd been holding it. I considered leaving it there. Small towns had their quirks, their stories they told newcomers for entertainment. But the bell had been too precise, too deliberate, and the scraping on the window. I stood, carried my mug to the bar, and addressed the older man. "Excuse me, you heard her, about the bell." He turned his head just enough that one bloodshot eye looked at me. He had the sort of face that made you think of old leather gloves, creased, tough, weathered by too many winters. He took a sip of his pint. "You're American." "Yeah. Then you'll want to do what Americans do best," he said. "What's that?" "Leave." I forced a smile. Not really an option, not for a while. He studied me like I was a piece on a board he'd already seen lose this game before. "What's your name?" "Daniel." He nodded once. "I'm Peter Kells." He looked away, back toward his drink, and I thought the conversation was over. Then, without turning, he said, "Don't go into the trees behind that house." My skin tightened. "Why?" "Because they go farther than they ought." I waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. He simply stared into his pint like it contained something moving. I left the pub with my groceries and a growing sense that my fresh start had stepped onto someone else's unfinished story. Back at the house, I unpacked more fully, trying to fill the rooms with normality. I set up my laptop on the dining table, made a list of errands, wrote down my work schedule, but the house resisted becoming ordinary. At noon, while I was putting groceries away, I heard a soft sound from upstairs, like a chair scraping across the floor. I froze. The house was empty. I stood still long enough that my pulse became loud in my ears. Then the sound came again, slow and deliberate. I walked upstairs, each step measured. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and old paint. My bedroom door was open. Inside, the room looked almost the same, except the bedside table lamp was on. I distinctly remembered turning it off. My throat tightened. I stepped inside and switched it off again. The click echoed. There was nothing else out of place, no sign of anyone, no open window, no footsteps above, just the quiet hum of a house that was too old to be trusted. I told myself I'd made a mistake, that I'd left it on without noticing. Then I saw the mirror. The wardrobe had a full-length mirror attached to its inside door. I hadn't paid attention to it last night. Now, in daylight, it reflected the room clearly. Bed, window, lamp, me. But behind me, in the reflection only, there was a shape in the corner near the door. Thin, pale, like a person standing with their head slightly tilted. I spun around. The corner was empty. I looked back at the mirror. The shape was still there, sharper now, as if it was learning how to be seen. It wasn't a person. Not exactly. It had shoulders, yes, but they were too narrow, and its neck was elongated like something stretched. Its face was a blur of light and shadow, but where the eyes should be, there were two dark pits like wet holes in paper. My breath caught, and the mirror fogged slightly where I exhaled. The shape in the reflection leaned forward. Not much, just enough to make my stomach lurch. I did the only thing my brain could think to do. I slammed the wardrobe door shut, hiding the mirror. The bang reverberated through the room. I stood there, hand on the handle, shaking. My own reflection was gone. The room looked suddenly too normal again, the way a predator looks harmless when it closes its eyes. After a long minute, I released the handle and backed away. My heart hammered like it was trying to escape. I left the bedroom door open and went downstairs, refusing to look at any reflective surface. The kettle seemed too shiny. The dark screen of my laptop seemed like a portal. I kept my gaze low, focused on the grain of the wooden floor. By late afternoon, I had managed to convince myself it was stress, exhaustion, jet lag. The mind could play tricks when you were alone. So when evening came, I forced myself to take a walk through town, to see people, to remind my body it lived in the real world. The river path was lined with old stone walls slick with moss. The water moved slowly, carrying leaves and shadows. In the distance, the clock tower rose like a blunt finger pointing at the sky. I found myself walking without intention until the houses thinned and the street narrowed toward a small hill. At the top stood an old churchyard, its gate half open. The church itself was small and worn, made of dark stone that seemed to drink the remaining light. Its windows were narrow and leaded. The graveyard was crowded, the stones leaning like exhausted men. I stepped through the gate. As I wandered between the graves, I noticed many of the headstones had the same symbol carved near the base, a bell shape, hollow in the middle, and beneath it a circle that looked like an eye. I crouched beside one stone to see better. The engraving was shallow but deliberate. The name above it was unreadable with age, but the dates were clear. 1891, 1891, an infant. I moved to another stone. 1913, 1913, another short life. Cold unease crawled up my spine. I stood and looked out across the graveyard. The symbol appeared again and again, sometimes on newer stones too, like a mark of membership. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw a man in a dark coat approaching, carrying a small bucket and brush. He looked to be in his 40s, with pale skin and a thin face that seemed drawn tight over his bones. "Visitors are rare," he said, stopping a few paces away. "Sorry," I replied. "I didn't mean to intrude. I'm new in town." He studied me. Halberd's tenant? The fact that he knew made my stomach drop. "Yes." He nodded as if confirming something unpleasant. "Then the graveyard will interest you." I frowned. "Why?" He gestured toward the symbol on the stones. "Greywick keeps records, even when it pretends it doesn't." "What does it mean?" I asked, pointing to the bell and eye carving. His expression tightened. "It means they were counted." "Counted?" He lowered his voice. "When the bell rings, it doesn't tell time. It counts debts." A chill ran through me. "Debts to who?" The man's eyes flicked toward the trees beyond the graveyard where the fog gathered thickly. "To what?" He took a step closer, and I realized his hands were stained with something dark. Soil, or old varnish, or dried blood. It was hard to tell in the fading light. "Do you know why Greywick survived?" he asked. "Survived what?" "The hunger," he said simply. "The winters when everything failed. The years the river ran low and the mills stopped. Greywick survived because it made an agreement." My mouth felt dry. "With who?" Again that small correction in his gaze. "Not who." "With the hollow bell," he said. The wind moved through the graveyard then, stirring dead leaves against stone. Somewhere far away, a crow finally called, one harsh note, like laughter cut short. The man lifted his bucket. "Go home, Mr. Mercer. Shut your curtains, and when you hear the bell tonight..." He paused, and his eyes fixed on mine with sudden intensity. "Do not count." My pulse hammered. "Why?" His lips pressed together. "Because if you finish the count, it finishes you." He walked past me toward the church door, the brush in his bucket clinking softly like bones. I stood alone among the graves until the cold drove me back. Night fell early, as it does in England, swallowing the town in a damp darkness. By the time I reached my house, the fog was thick enough that my porch light seemed to glow inside a glass jar. I locked the door behind me. I drew the curtains, every single one, even the small window in the stairwell. I tried to distract myself with TV, but the signal was patchy. The screen flickered, and the faces of people in the news looked distorted, as if stretched by invisible hands. So I turned it off. I made tea. The kettle screamed too loudly in the silence. I sat on the couch and watched the minute hand of my phone crawl toward midnight, thinking about the mirror, the graveyard symbol, the man's warning. Do not count. At 1:13 a.m., the bell rang. One strike. I flinched, even though I was waiting for it. A pause, long enough for my mind to fill with dread. Second strike. I pressed my palms against my ears. The sound didn't get quieter. It seemed to come from inside the walls, inside the bones of the house. Third strike. Fourth. Fifth. My lips moved involuntarily, as if counting was a reflex, as if the bell was pulling numbers out of my mouth. I clenched my jaw hard enough to hurt. Sixth. Seventh. Eighth. The scraping started at the back window. Slow, gentle, like someone dragging a fingernail along the glass just to feel it vibrate. Ninth. I squeezed my eyes shut, and behind my eyelids I saw the symbol from the gravestones. A hollow bell and an eye beneath it, watching, waiting. 10th. The scraping moved upward, as if something was climbing the window from the outside. 11th. I felt moisture at the corner of my mouth and realized I'd bitten my lip. 12th. The air in the room grew colder, the kind of cold that doesn't belong to weather but to something opening. 13th. I nearly whispered it. The number formed itself in my throat like a prayer. I swallowed it down. The bell stopped mid-breath, not fading, not echoing, simply ending like a cord cut. Silence hit the room like pressure, and then in the quiet, a voice spoke very softly from upstairs. Not a whisper through the air, but the distinct, intimate sound of someone standing just beyond the stairwell, calling my name. Daniel? My blood turned to ice. I didn't answer. The voice came again, closer, as if stepping down one stair at a time. Daniel, you counted. My body trembled with the certainty that I hadn't, that I almost had, that maybe almost was enough. A slow creak sounded on the stairs. One step, then another, and then the lamp in the corner of the living room, one I hadn't turned on, clicked to life by itself, casting a weak yellow pool of light. In that light, the front door handle began to turn. Not rattling, not forced, turned slowly, patiently, as if the person on the other side had all the time in the world. The lock was still engaged, but the handle kept turning anyway. And from behind the door, something breathed. A long inhale, a long exhale, like it had been waiting in the mouth. Fog for years, and I had finally unknowingly invited it home. The door didn't open. It should have. The handle turned with the slow confidence of a key in a lock, but the deadbolt held. Still, the metal moved as if the bolt were only a suggestion. I sat frozen on the couch, staring at the door like it was a television screen that might show me something I didn't want to understand. My hands were numb. My mouth tasted like copper from the bite I'd given myself. Behind the door, the breathing continued. Not heavy, not panicked, measured, almost curious. Then, very softly, something tapped the wood. Once, twice, a knuckle, a nail, a small bone. My mind tried to name it so it could shrink it. The voice came again from the stairwell, closer now. Daniel, I couldn't see anyone. The stairs were a dark throat going up into the second floor, and the air near them looked thick like smoke without the smell. Daniel, the voice repeated, and this time it sounded like it was smiling. I stood up too quickly and nearly stumbled. My knees complained like I'd been kneeling too long. I backed toward the kitchen, never taking my eyes off the door. The handle turned again. A gentle pause. Another slow turn. Something on the other side seemed to be learning the mechanism, testing the shape of entry. I grabbed the nearest thing from the counter, a chef's knife that came with the rental. It felt absurdly light in my hand. I held it in front of me anyway, the way a child holds a toy sword. The breathing stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. In it, I became too aware of my own heartbeat, the small creaks in the house, the way the fridge hummed like a nervous animal. Then, without warning, the lamp that had turned on by itself went out. The room dropped into darkness so complete that for a second I thought my eyes had failed. And in that darkness, the deadbolt clicked. Not from the inside, not from a key turning. A click like a lock deciding it no longer belonged to me. The front door swung inward an inch. Cold fog poured through the crack as if the night itself was trying to slip inside. And in that thin opening, something moved. Something pale and narrow like a forearm, but too long, too smooth. I jerked backward, knife raised. The door opened another inch. The smell hit me then. Wet earth, old iron, and something like a hospital hallway, sterile and wrong. The voice from upstairs whispered with pleasure, "You heard me." I did the only rational thing my terrified brain could grasp. I ran. I bolted into the kitchen, nearly slipping on the tile, and yanked open the back door. The fog outside was thick enough to press against my face. I stepped out anyway, lunging down the small back steps into the yard. My shoes sank into wet grass. The cold bit at my ankles. The fence line loomed like a boundary drawn by a tired hand. Behind me, the house groaned, not creaked, groaned, like an animal straining against a trap. I ran toward the far end of the yard, away from the back windows, away from the sense of eyes on me. The brambles grabbed at my jeans, tearing. Somewhere in the trees beyond the fence, something shifted as if responding to the scent of movement. I reached the fence and grabbed the top rail. The wood was slick, cold. I hoisted myself up, a sound behind me, a soft footstep on wet grass, too close. I dropped back down on the yard side, spun, knife still in hand. Nothing. Fog swirled. The shapes of bushes and lawn furniture became silhouettes that seemed to rearrange themselves when I blinked. And then I heard it again. The scraping, not on glass now, but on wood, along the fence, like fingernails trailing over it. Slow, patient, like something walking the boundary, letting me know it didn't need to rush. I backed away from the fence, heart pounding, and my heel struck something hard. I looked down. In the grass near the brambles was a small patch of earth that looked recently disturbed, darker and looser than the rest. Something white protruded from it, barely visible. A bone. No, not a bone. A piece of chalk? A shard of porcelain? My mind jumped at the safer options first. I crouched, knife trembling in my hand, and brushed the wet grass aside. It was a finger bone, small, human, and around it, pressed into the mud, was that symbol again, crudely drawn with something that might have been ash. A bell shape, hollow inside, and beneath it an eye. The fog thickened, and for a moment I thought I saw figures in it. Tall, thin silhouettes standing just outside the fence line among the trees, watching. The air grew heavier, as if the yard had become a sealed room. I stood and staggered backward toward the house. The back door was still open behind me, spilling faint light onto the grass like a lifeline. I ran back inside and slammed it shut, locking it with shaking hands. The moment the latch caught, the pressure in the air changed. Not gone, but redirected, like something outside had been denied a doorway and was choosing another. Upstairs, the sound of footsteps resumed, slow, descending, one step, then another. I backed into the living room, knife held up, eyes fixed on the stairwell. The fog that had seeped in through the front door crack was still there, pooling along the floor like spilled milk. It crawled toward the stairs, eager. "Daniel," the voice said again, now from halfway down the staircase. A figure emerged into the dim light from the kitchen. At first it looked like a person, someone tall wearing a long coat. But the longer I stared, the more wrong it became. The shoulders were too narrow, the limbs too long. The head was bent slightly to one side as if it were listening to a sound only it could hear. It didn't walk. It didn't step like an animal. It slid. And behind it, pressed against the wall where it passed, the wallpaper darkened with moisture, as if its presence drew dampness out of the air. I raised the knife. "Stay back!" The figure stopped at the bottom of the stairs. Its face was featureless in the shadows, except for two darker hollows where eyes might have been. But I felt its attention on me the way you feel heat from an oven. The figure tilted its head again. Then, with a movement like someone unfolding a handkerchief, its mouth appeared, an opening forming where there hadn't been anything. Not lips, not teeth, just a split in pale skin. A voice came from it, but not the one that had been calling my name. This voice was deeper, layered as if several throats were speaking at once. "You finished the hour." I shook my head, knife shaking with me. I didn't count. The figure leaned forward slightly, and I smelled that iron and earth scent stronger now. "You listened," it said, Behind it in the stairwell shadow, another shape moved, smaller, closer to the size of a child. It peered around the banister like a curious kid peeking at a visitor, then another and another. 3 small pale forms with long necks, all watching. My stomach turned. The tall figure's mouth widened a fraction. Greywick keeps its hours. Greywick keeps its debts. My hands were sweating so much I nearly dropped the knife. The figure took a step toward me, and the fog on the floor surged forward too, like it was connected. I swung the knife in a warning slash through the air. The blade passed through nothing solid. The figure didn't flinch. Instead, the tall shape's head snapped up, suddenly facing the ceiling, as if hearing something. Then it turned its hollow gaze back to me. "You carry a break," it said softly. "A crack, a hollow." My breath hitched. Divorce, loneliness, the fresh start that was really an escape. The figure seemed to taste it. The smaller forms at the stairs began to whisper, their voices thin and reedy, like wind through reeds. "Count, count, count, count." I clapped my free hand over my ear. The whispers got louder, crawling into my head like insects. The tall figure slid closer. "We can fill you," it said. I backed away until I hit the wall. Panic squeezed my chest. I looked around for anything, any exit. The fireplace. It was old, decorative, with a small set of tools beside it. I lunged and grabbed the poker, heavy iron, and held it up like a spear. The figure paused as if amused that I'd chosen a more antique weapon. Then, in the distance, something changed. A new sound pushed through the fog in whispers. A car engine. Headlights cutting through the front window curtain edges like thin blades. The tall figure stiffened, its mouth narrowing. The smaller forms hissed like cats. The front door handle rattled, this time not from the outside trying to get in, but from someone trying to get through. A man's voice shouted, muffled by wood. "Daniel, open up," Peter Kells. Relief hit me so hard my knees weakened. The tall figure turned toward the door, and the fog surged forward as if defensive. Peter pounded again. "Daniel!" I didn't hesitate. I ran to the door, fumbling with the lock. The tall figure moved fast then, not sliding, but snapping forward like a shadow thrown by a sudden light. It crossed the room in a blink, reaching toward me with an arm that seemed to stretch longer than possible. I swung the fireplace poker. It connected with something that felt like wet wood and cold meat at the same time. A vibration ran up my arms. The figure recoiled, not in pain, but in surprise, as if it hadn't expected contact. The smaller forms at the stairs shrieked, a thin, piercing sound that felt like needles behind my eyes. I wrenched the door open. Peter Kells stood on the porch, breath coming in white bursts, eyes wide. He held something in his hand, a small metal object on a chain. A bell, not a church bell, a handbell, tarnished and dark. He shoved it into my face. "Take it!" "What? Take it!" he snapped, and I grabbed it automatically. The moment my fingers closed around it, the air changed. The whispers faltered. The fog on the floor paused like a tide meeting a rock. Peter pushed past me into the house, slammed the door, and locked it with practiced speed. He turned to face the room, raising the handbell like a crucifix. The tall figure had retreated to the base of the stairs. Its mouth split wider in a silent expression that might have been anger or hunger. Peter's voice was low, fierce. "Back." The tall figure's head tilted. It seemed to study the bell in Peter's hand, and for the first time I sensed something like caution. Peter looked at me sharply. "Did you count?" "No," I said, voice shaking. "I didn't, but it was in my head." Peter nodded as if that was expected. Listening is enough for them to start. Counting seals it. The tall figure took a slow step forward. Peter rang the handbell once. The sound was thin, sharp, and wrong. Not like metal ringing, but like glass cracking inside my skull. The tall figure froze. The smaller forms at the stairs hissed and recoiled, pressing back into shadow. Peter rang it again, harder. The fog on the floor rippled and pulled backward, retreating toward the stairs as if yanked. The tall figure's mouth tightened. It leaned back, as if resisting a wind. Then it spoke, voice layered and cold. "That bell is not yours." Peter's eyes narrowed. "Neither is this house." The tall figure's gaze slid to me. He heard the hour. He was called. Peter's jaw clenched. "He's not from Greywick." The figure's mouth stretched slightly. "Then he is perfect." A chill stabbed through me. "What does that mean?" Peter didn't look away from the thing. "It means you don't belong to the agreement, which means you're not protected by it." The words landed like a death sentence. The figure seemed to swell in the shadows, as if enjoying Peter's admission. "Greywick pays in its own blood," it whispered. "But outsiders bring new flavors." Peter rang the bell a third time. The tall figure jerked back, and the smaller forms shrank into darkness like rats fleeing light. The air in the room warmed a fraction, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. The tall figure retreated slowly up the stairs, as if the bell's sound created invisible steps it couldn't cross. When it reached the landing, it paused and turned its hollow gaze down at us. "You will ring the hour," it said to Peter. Then it tilted its head toward me. "And you will count." Its mouth split into a grin that didn't belong on a face with no features. Then it dissolved, not vanishing, but thinning into fog and shadow until it was just a darker patch of air near the ceiling. The smaller forms were gone too. The house was suddenly only a house again, creaking, cold, silent. Peter lowered the bell, breathing hard. His eyes darted around the room like he expected something to return at any second. I stared at him, hands still clutching the tarnished bell he'd made me grab. "What the hell was that?" I asked. Peter looked exhausted, older than he had in the pub. "That," he said, "is why Greywick is still standing." My throat tightened. "Why did it know my name?" Peter's gaze flicked to the stairs. "Because the house told it, or the trees did, or the bell did." He rubbed a hand over his face. "Listen, you're going to come with me." "Right now?" "Yes, right now." His voice left no room for argument. "Because it came into your house on the first night it spoke to you, and that means one thing." I swallowed. "What?" Peter's eyes met mine. "It's decided you're a payment." Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing listening. I forced myself to breathe. "Okay, where are we going?" Peter hesitated, then said the words like they hurt. "To the churchyard." My stomach dropped, remembering the stones and the symbols. Peter grabbed my arm. "Bring the bell you're holding, and don't let go, no matter what you hear." I looked down at the tarnished handbell in my grip. It felt colder than iron, heavier than it should have been, and when I tilted it slightly, I saw something engraved faintly into the metal, so worn it was almost invisible. A hollow bell, and an eye. We didn't take the car. Peter said engines attracted attention, their attention. Instead, we walked through the fog-soaked streets, moving quickly but not running, as if speed itself could offend something watching. Greywick at night felt compressed, the buildings leaning inward, the road narrowing when I wasn't looking directly at it. Every window was dark, not sleeping dark, closed dark. The bell in my hand pulsed faintly, not vibrating, but heavy in a way that seemed to shift with my heartbeat. I kept my fingers locked around its cold handle. "What happens at the churchyard?" I asked quietly. Peter didn't answer right away. His breath fogged in front of him in short bursts. Finally he said, "We see if you're already marked." The words settled into me like a sickness. We passed the clock tower. Its face read 1 to 26 a.m. The hands were still moving, but the sound they made wasn't ticking. It was scraping, like metal dragged across bone. Peter glanced at it and spat onto the ground. Clock never learned when to stop. The churchyard gate was open again. It hadn't been earlier that evening. I was sure of it. Fog pooled low among the gravestones, curling around their bases like water around ankles. The church loomed at the far end, its dark windows blind and watchful. Peter stopped just inside the gate. "If you see your name," he said, "don't read past it." "What?" "If you hear a voice you recognize," he added, "don't answer." "And if I see, don't touch," he snapped, then softened his tone. "Just stay close." We moved deeper into the graveyard. The stones felt closer together than before, crowding the path. The symbols carved into them, bell and eye, seemed fresher now, the grooves darker, as if the stone itself had begun to bleed. I noticed something else too, the dates. So many stones ended on the same day, different years, same date. September 29th, today. My mouth went dry. "Peter, I know," he said. A sound rose from the fog, a low murmur like dozens of people whispering from behind walls. I couldn't make out words, just cadence, counting cadence. Peter stopped beside a stone that leaned sharply to one side. He brushed moss away with his sleeve. The name beneath was clear. Mercer Daniel. No date, no birth year, no death year, just my name. I staggered back. This isn't possible. Peter's face was pale. "It shouldn't be filled yet." "Yet?" The whispering grew louder. Shapes formed in the fog, thin silhouettes standing between the stones, too still to be people. Children-sized, adult-sized, too tall. "They're early," Peter muttered, "or you're late." The ground beneath the stone trembled. A crack formed across the dirt, splitting open like a mouth. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of iron and rot. From the church, a door creaked open. Not swung, unsealed. A deeper bell rang then. Not the distant counting bell. This one came from underground. The hollow bell. The sound wasn't loud, it was vast. It seemed to pass through my chest, my teeth, my thoughts. The whispering stopped instantly. Peter grabbed my shoulder. "Do not count." I squeezed my eyes shut, jaw clenched, teeth biting down on the inside of my cheek. One strike. Pressure behind my eyes. Two. I screamed, not in fear, but to drown it out. The sound cut off abruptly. Silence collapsed inward. When I opened my eyes, the fog had drawn back from the churchyard center, revealing a wide circle of bare earth. And something standing in, it was tall, taller than the thing in my house, and thinner, like it had been stretched upward by invisible hooks. Its surface wasn't skin, but something closer to old parchment, covered in faint carvings. Names, dates, symbols, thousands of them. Where its head should have been was an open cavity, bell-shaped, hollow and dark. And deep inside that hollow, something watched. An eye. The whisper returned, but now it came from inside the thing. Dead acknowledged. Peter stepped forward, raising the handbell. "This one is not yours." The hollow bell tilted toward him. Greywick offered him shelter. Peter's voice shook. Greywick offered its own. The earth around the stones cracked open. Pale hands reached out, clawing at air, at fog, at nothing. Faces pushed up from below, mouths open in silent screams. The hollow bell turned its gaze to me. "You heard the hour," it said, voice echoing inside itself. "You stand between." My vision blurred. My thoughts felt slippery, like they were being pulled somewhere else. "I didn't agree to anything," I said. The eye focused. "No one ever does." Peter rang the handbell. The sound snapped sharp and painful, like bone breaking. The hollow bell recoiled slightly, but not fully. "Insufficient," it said. Peter swore. "Damn it." He looked at me. "Daniel, listen to me very carefully." I could barely breathe. "You can't leave Greywick now," he said, "but you can change how you're counted." "What does that mean?" "It means you don't run," he said. "You don't hide. You don't listen." The hollow bell leaned closer. "You ring," Peter said. My heart slammed against my ribs. "Ring?" Peter nodded once. "You ring yourself." The bell in my hand burned cold. "I don't know how." "You do," he said. "It already knows you." The hollow bell's eye widened. "Choose," it intoned. The whispering rose again, louder, insistent. "Count, count, count." I lifted the handbell. Every instinct screamed not to. But somewhere beneath the fear, I felt it, an understanding sliding into place, unwanted but clear. Greywick survived because it rang the bell for the hollow bell. But the hollow bell couldn't ring itself. I rang the handbell, once. The sound exploded outward, not sharp like before, but deep and resonant. The gravestones shook. The hands clawing from the ground froze mid-reach. The hollow bell shrieked, not in pain but in recognition. "Claimed," it roared. The fog rushed toward me, wrapping around my body like chains. I rang the bell again. The whispering turned into screams. The hollow bell's eye locked onto mine. "You will stand," it said. "You will ring." Peter shouted my name, but his voice sounded distant, underwater. I rang the bell a third time. Everything went dark. I woke on cold stone. Morning light filtered through mist. The churchyard was quiet, peacefully so, like nothing terrible had ever happened there. Peter sat nearby, looking older than ever. "You're alive," I said. "So are you," he replied, "for now." I struggled to sit up. My head throbbed. What did I do? Peter didn't meet my eyes. "You took a place." I looked toward the stone with my name. It was still there. But now, beneath Mercer Daniel, a word had appeared. "Warden," I swallowed. "What happens now?" Peter stood slowly. "Now you hear the bell every night." My stomach sank. "And you make sure," he said quietly, "that Greywick never misses a count." I didn't leave Greywick. I told myself at first that I could. That, once the shock faded, once my body stopped shaking and my thoughts lined up like they used to, I'd pack a bag and drive until the fog thinned and the roads widened and the world remembered how to behave. But every time the idea formed, it slid apart in my mind like something greased. "You won't get far," Peter said that morning, standing with me at the edge of the churchyard. "None of the wardens ever do." The word felt heavier now that it belonged to me. Warden. It wasn't a title anyone handed you. It was a condition. The churchyard looked ordinary in daylight. The fog was thinner, the gravestones merely old instead of hungry. The symbol, the hollow bell and eye, had faded from many of the stones, leaving only faint scars like healed wounds, except mine. My stone stood straighter than the others, as if recently set. The word warden was cut deep, sharp-edged, like it had been carved from the inside out. Why me? I asked. Peter stared at the stone. Because you were hollow. I laughed once, harsh and broken. That's your explanation? No, he said quietly. That's theirs. We walked back through town as the morning crept in. Curtains lifted, doors opened, people emerged as if from a shared dream, nodding to each other, resuming routines with the relief of survivors. They looked at me differently now. Not fear, not exactly, recognition. At the grocery store, the woman at the register paused when she saw me, then inclined her head slightly, the way you acknowledge someone in uniform. At the Crooked Crown, the woman who served coffee set my mug down without asking what I wanted. On the house, she said. The older man at the bar, Peter's usual seat, was empty. Where is he? I asked. She hesitated. Peter sleeps during the day now. Why? Her eyes flicked toward the clock tower outside. Because he listens at night. So did I. The first night after the churchyard, I didn't go home. Peter insisted I stay with him, in a small stone house closer to the river. He said the Halberd place was too open, too eager. We sat at his kitchen table while dusk pressed its face against the windows. You'll hear it even if you don't want to, Peter said. The bell doesn't ask permission. What happens if I ignore it? Peter's mouth tightened. Then it rings alone. And that's bad. That's how Greywick dies. He showed me the handbell in better light. It was older than I'd thought, its surface etched with layers of symbols worn thin by time and touch. This isn't the hollow bell, he said. It's an answer. I turned it over in my hands. Who made it? Peter shrugged. First warden, probably, or the second. Records get selective. Outside, the light drained from the sky. At 1:13 a.m., the bell rang. Not the handbell, the hollow bell. It rose from the ground, from the stones, from the spaces between thoughts. One strike, thin and deep at the same time. My body reacted before my mind did. My muscles tightened, my breath caught. Don't count, Peter said softly. I know. The second strike came. The sound tugged at something inside me, not memory, not emotion, but a raw instinct, like the urge to finish a pattern once you've seen the start. Third strike. My lips pressed together so hard they hurt. Fourth, fifth. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I became aware of spaces that shouldn't exist, corners without walls, depths beneath the floorboards. Sixth, Peter watched me closely. This is the easy part. Seventh, easy, I hissed. He nodded. It gets worse. Eighth, from outside I heard movement. Soft footsteps near the river, the brush of something passing just beyond the walls. Ninth, a voice whispered my name from somewhere under the house. 10th, the whisper turned into many voices, overlapping, urgent. Count. 11th, I raised the handbell. 12th, the hollow bell's sound wavered, stretching like it was listening back. I rang the handbell once. The sound cut clean through the night, sharp and declarative. The pressure in the room eased, just a fraction. The hollow bell rang again, 13th, and then fell silent. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was satisfied. I lowered the handbell, shaking. That's it? I asked. For tonight, Peter said. It didn't stay that simple. As days passed, I began to notice things others didn't, or pretended not to. The trees at the edge of town leaned closer each night. The river ran lower, exposing dark shapes beneath the surface that weren't rocks. Children drew the bell and eye symbol in chalk on sidewalks without knowing why. And sometimes, when the fog was thick enough, I saw figures standing just beyond the streetlights, tall, thin, waiting. The hollow bell didn't ring every night, only when something was due. Peter explained it over many late conversations, always after midnight. Greywick made an agreement generations ago, he said. When the land failed, when people starved, they promised the hollow bell a count. Not souls exactly, moments, lives trimmed short, accidents, illnesses, names on stone. And the warden? I asked. The warden makes sure the count stays accurate, he said. Not too many, not too few. And if it's too few, Peter looked at me. It takes interest. I learned the signs. Animals going silent, fog that moved against the wind, clocks stopping at the same minute, the taste of iron in the air. On those nights, I rang the handbell once before the 13th strike. It didn't stop the hollow bell, but it reminded it that it was being watched. Weeks passed, then months. Peter grew quieter, more withdrawn. I caught him staring at his own reflection sometimes, as if checking whether he was still entirely there. One night, he didn't wake. The hollow bell rang twice that night, only twice. I knew what that meant. I found Peter's stone in the churchyard at dawn. His name was carved clean and deep, the dates complete, no symbol beneath it. His debt was finished. I was alone now. Greywick adjusted the way it always had. Someone else poured the coffee at the Crooked Crown. Someone else swept the church steps. No one asked if I was ready. I moved back into the Halberd house. The trees behind it no longer whispered at me. They listened. The mirror in the wardrobe showed only my reflection now, most nights. Sometimes when the fog was thick and the hour close, I saw an eye behind my own. I stopped calling my family. The distance between us felt less like geography and more like a rule. When my phone rang from an unknown number once, the screen cracked down the center before I could answer. At night, I stood at the window with the curtains open. I wasn't afraid anymore. Fear was a luxury for people who could leave. The hollow bell rang again last night. It rang once. That meant something new. I rang the handbell twice in reply. The sound echoed farther than it should have, reaching into places beyond Greywick, places that hadn't heard it before. The fog stirred restless. Somewhere far away, a train slowed without knowing why. A town on another map felt suddenly, inexplicably quiet. I understand now what the hollow bell truly wants. Not obedience, continuation. And one day, maybe years from now, maybe sooner, I will feel the hollow inside me close, filled at last by the rhythm of the count. When that happens, Greywick will need a new warden. Someone passing through, someone tired, someone hollow. If you ever find yourself in a small English town where the air smells old and the clocks scrape instead of tick, listen carefully. If you hear a bell at 1:13 a.m., do not count. And if you see a man standing by the window holding a small tarnished bell, watching the fog like it's alive, don't wave, don't speak. Just keep walking, because Greywick is still standing, and it's always listening.